Thank you very much. So, part two of fragment one, I emphasize strongly these are purely my reflections on the voice of the silence, aided and abetted by some excellent literature, including talks on the path of occultism, part two, and a lovely PDF study guide available online via a theosophist in New Zealand. So we're considering then the voice of the silence. I've started with an image of HPB, and here is a painting by Paul Gauguin. Where do we come from? Who are we? Where are we going? I feel this is particularly significant in the light of our subject matter. Despite immense scientific and technological advances, both last century and this one, there are still questions that remain unanswered about that are fundamental indeed to the human condition and our very purpose here on earth. Questions such as who are we? Where do we come from? Why are we here? And where do we go to from here? I'm going to address these very briefly in the light of theosophical teachings. Who are we? Theosophy states that in essence we are monads, indivisible sparks of a great divine flame operating through our solar system, also referred to as the solar logos. We are all aspects of the great solar being. That is where we come from. Why are we here? We are here because the solar being has projected us down the various planes of consciousness as a means of unfolding latent spiritual qualities, and in the process gaining what Theosophy calls spiritual staying power, the ability to radiate and express spiritual qualities regardless of the constraints of the material world. Where do we go to from here? Theosophy states that when the instrument of the soul, the monad, has unfolded its symbolic lotus petals, through its mechanism, the personality, expressing spiritual qualities over its many lives, we then return to the Father's house, to the solar logos, returning something more than we were previously, and in doing so, contributing to the evolution of the greater being. So Theosophy informs us that we are monads. The monad, due to its vibration, purity of vibration, it cannot descend below its own levels of being. So it adopts mechanisms or structures to operate at the lower levels. The solar higher self is a reflection of the monad, existing on the planes of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas. The personality is the instrument of the soul, and the personality provides a means whereby the soul may contact the material world so that it may very gradually develop and express spiritual qualities by expressing the qualities of Atma, Buddhi, and Manas, divine persistent will, love wisely applied, wisdom lovingly applied, and the ability to think abstractly. Spiritual disciplines build a link or bridge between the soul and personality, referred to as the antakarana, which eventually serves as a floodgate for spiritual energies to the extent that it ceases to exist and soul and personality are unified in what we call the higher initiations of Theosophy. I mention this as it's relevant, of course, to the voice of the silence. As I said last week, the voice of the silence is a comprehensive poetic manual of spiritual instruction, insight, and inspiration. And it's a translation of fragments from a sacred book that HPB encountered during her studies in the East, the Book of the Golden Precepts. So let's continue to consider the verses of Fragment 1. Heaven's dewdrop glittering in the morn's first sunbeam within the bosom of the lotus, when dropped on earth becomes a piece of clay. Behold, the pearl is now a speck of Maya. So the monad's descent into matter that I referred to effectively converts a pearl into a speck of Maya. And this describes the immense challenges that we face as spirit immersed within the material world. And the thorough process of purification is essential if we are to succeed when we tread the spiritual path. Advaita Vedanta teachings employ the term vasana to describe behavioral tendencies, karmic imprints that influence our current behavior patterns. These are derived from the impressions of previous lives, known as samskaras, and the vasanas give rise to vrittis, these being thoughts that are commonly intertwined with our various desires and stimulated by external causes. Strive with thy thoughts unclean before they overpower thee. Use them as they will thee. For if thou sparest them and they take root and grow, know well, these thoughts will overpower and kill thee. Beware, disciple, suffer not, even though it be their shadow, to approach, for it will grow, increase in size and power, and then this thing of darkness will absorb thy being before thou hast well realized the black, foul monster's presence. So here are the vasanas, samskaras, and vrittis. And Indian teachings employ the symbolism of our personality as a mirror that must be cleansed of the vasanas so that it may reflect the light of the Atman, the immortal aspect of our being. In Theosophy, we'd say the soul is the instrument of the monad. And so spiritual development entails the removal of negative behavioral tendencies so that we can access the energies of the higher self. These spiritual impediments take the form of attachments, psychological complexes, and feelings of self-preservation. Before the mystic power can make of thee a god, Lanu, thou must have gained the faculty to slay thy lunar form at will. In part 1, we considered the analogy of the higher self as a potter creating an urn on the symbolic wheel of rebirth, that urn being our personality, capable of receiving and thereafter dispensing the energies of the spiritual planes of consciousness. And as spiritual aspirants, we must be aware that our transient personality, the lunar form just referred to, is the instrument of the soul, with the clay slowly being modeled with the potter's mind, as the earlier verses state. And through undertaking spiritual disciplines, we strengthen and widen the antakarana, especially through meditation, as a means of assisting the higher self in this process. And this enables the soul to infuse us with vast reservoirs of spiritual energy found on the planes of consciousness where it resides. And this is a prelude to the culmination of the soul's endeavors when the antakarana, as I said, ceases to exist as the personality becomes completely soul-infused. The personality is then bereft of desire and functions merely at the behest of the soul. So here, when we're talking about the lunar form, we must have recourse to theosophical teachings who talk of the lunar pitris, devas, or members of the angelic kingdom, devas that construct the bodies of the lower triad, that is the physical, astral, and mental bodies, which comprise the personality. We also have solar pitris, which create, maintain, and finally destroy the higher triad, this relating to the soul, the higher self. The self of matter and the self of spirit can never meet. One of the twain must disappear. There is no place for both. ere thy soul's mind can understand, the bud of the personality must be crushed out, the worm of sense destroyed past resurrection. In Theosophy, we symbolize the personality as a triangular structure, triangle facing downwards, this triangle comprised of the mental, astral, and physical bodies. The soul we represent as an upward-facing triangle containing its constituent parts of Atma, Buddhi, and higher manas. And when the bud of personality is crushed out and the aspirant entirely soul-infused, this is symbolized by the interlacing of these two triangles, which, of course, we see on the Theosophical logo. This is the six-pointed star that relates to the Seal of Solomon, the Star of David, and it is the root of the Shri Yantra of the Hindus. Thou canst not travel on the path before thou hast become that path itself. We become the path by expressing spiritual qualities that relate to the soul. These serve to construct the antakarana, which enables us to be increasingly infused by the energies of the higher self. So we express heart chakra qualities such as unconditional and inclusive forms of love, compassion, empathy, altruism, and so on. And when we tread the path, we say that the journey is the goal. It is the experiences that we encounter along the way that result in elevations in our consciousness and our level of being. I have an image here of Socrates and Plato from the famous Raphael painting, The School of Athens. And Socrates described the path as the jeweled way, a pathway that is ablaze with flashes of illumination. He referred to the soul, the higher self, as his daemon, and Socrates would turn inwards to consult his daemon to obtain insight, inspiration, and to ensure that the course of action he was following in his life was appropriate. And when we tread the path, Theosophy informs us we must assiduously practice the disciplines of meditation, study, and service. And the process of spiritual unfoldment will entail many experiences that challenge and test us as the higher self seeks to ascertain our worthiness as a reliable instrument of its expression, whilst it will seek to dispense with the pool of karma that has accumulated throughout our many previous lives. Let thy soul lend its ear to every cry of pain, like as the lotus bears its heart to drink the morning sun. Let not the fierce sun dry one tear of pain before thyself has wiped it from the sufferer's eye, but let each burning human teardrop on thy heart and there remain, nor ever brush it off, until the pain that caused it is removed. These tears, O thou of heart most merciful, these are the streams that irrigate the fields of charity immortal. 'Tis on such soil that grows the midnight blossom of Buddha, more difficult to find, more rare to view than is the flower of the Voge tree. It is the seed of freedom from rebirth. It isolates the arhat both from strife and lust. It leads them through the fields of being unto the peace and bliss known only in the land of silence and non-being. So I've chosen here a relief image of an 11-face depiction of the great Bodhisattva of Avalokiteshvara. In Theosophy, when we use the term arhat, it describes someone who has attained the fourth initiation, where personality's desires are entirely renounced and acts of service are one's sole objective. Mahayana Buddhist traditions employ the same term to indicate one who has reached a considerably advanced stage in the path to enlightenment. And each of these describe one whose mind is in direct contact with what Theosophy describes as the Buddhic plane. At this level of consciousness, Whilst the duality of spirit and matter still prevail, the illusion of separateness induced by Maya is extinguished. One then perceives the underlying aspect of all life forms, the one divine life, and one is rendered sensitive and compassionate towards the pain and suffering of all others. In Mahayana Buddhism, the Bodhisattva possesses a spontaneous wish, and compassionate mind to attain Buddhahood for the benefit of all sentient beings. However, whilst the Arhat is both sensitive and compassionate to the pain of others, it's important to be aware that pain and suffering serve an important purpose in the evolutionary design and the monad's attainment of spiritual staying power. I've also chosen this beautiful slide of the female Kuan Yin, she who hears the cries of the world, one of Buddhism's most beloved bodhisattvas. So returning to the subject of pain, here is an image of the great Bulgarian spiritual teacher Peter Dunov, who considered God, whom he also referred to as the primordial principle, ultimate reality, and the sun of life, considered God as the innermost principle of love, wisdom, and truth. He stated that God manifests as light in our minds, warmth in our hearts, and strength in our will. And Dunov states that the aim of life is the perfecting of love. And given that our solar system is governed by the second ray of love wisdom, this is a most resonant statement. However, this comes at a price. As Dunov states, the path to God is a path of suffering. In this way, you will come to know him. You will come to value what God gives you, as well as what he takes away from you. Suffering is the path to freedom. Here is an image of Christ on the cross, Christ dying for the sins of humanity. Esoterically, this great soul took on a larger share of the planetary karma than he was required to. That is what is meant by this term. I've also chosen this image of St. Christopher, who ferried the child across the river under great duress as the child became heavier and heavier. And at the end of the journey, the child revealed that he was Christ himself. Of course, in Indian teachings, the pathway from the shore of everyday life to that of transcendence and bliss is symbolized as a river crossing. Kill out desire, but if thou killest it, take heed, lest from the dead it should again arise. Here is an image of Hercules and the Hydra, or Heracles and the Hydra, if one considers the Greek version. So last week I illustrated the effects that desire exerts upon the spiritual aspirant, as the fascination and sensual nature of external objects and circumstances divert one into blind alleys which are anathema to the development and expression of the soul. So we are advised to extinguish desire, but also, very importantly, to remain vigilant should it again arise from its apparent death. So here we see Hercules battling the nine-headed Hydra. In this myth, the Hydra resides within a dark, foul swamp, which symbolizes the subterranean regions of the human psyche, located at what we would call lower astral levels. This is where our primal instincts, passions, lusts, and desires are found. And when treading the path as a means of effecting transformation, we must venture into the dark swamp of the lower unconscious and the associated astral and related mental levels of our being, so that we can overcome our personal Hydra. And in this myth, we are informed that one of the Hydra's heads is immortal, and that if any of the two other heads are destroyed, any of the other heads are destroyed, two will grow in its place. So the capacity of the Hydra to regenerate and grow two heads is symbolic of the fact that we cannot simply repress aspects of our lower nature without facing a future backlash. Rather, these should be confronted and transmuted so that we can effect spiritual transformation. So the key towards overcoming the Hydra is through mental polarization and application of will. And in this myth, after vanquishing the monster, Hercules buries the Hydra's immortal head under a rock. The symbolism here informs us that despite overcoming the lower nature and the desire nature, winning many battles on this respect, the lower instincts and the forces of the lower astral plane remain present. And it's by subjecting these to the force of our will and by purifying the vibrations of our various bodies, refraining from engaging in any thoughts driven by these levels of being, that we remain free from their influence. So the metaphorical immortal head of the Hydra is buried under the symbolic rock. Kill love of life, but if thou slayest Tanna, let this not be for thirst of life eternal, but to replace the fleeting by the everlasting. Desire nothing, chafe not at karma, nor at nature's changeless laws, but struggle only with the personal, the transitory, the evanescent, and the perishable. The notes to the text describe the Sanskrit word Tanna as the will to live, the fear of death, and love for life, that force or energy which causes rebirth. Tanna underlies our various desires, which we must relinquish if we are to succeed in treading the path. The succeeding line then advises us to desire nothing. We must accept our karmic dispensation in life and the laws of nature which underlie our various experiences. Indeed, these represent windows of opportunity. Our struggle is merely with our transient personality as we seek to comply with the intent of the soul so that we may be fashioned into an effective spiritual instrument. And this is one of my favorite verses in Fragment 1. Help nature and work on with her, and nature will regard thee as one of her creators and make obeisance. And she will open wide before thee the portals of her secret chambers, lay bare before thy gaze the treasures hidden in the very depths of her pure virgin bosom. Unsullied by the hand of matter, she shows her treasures only to the eye of spirit, the eye which never closes, the eye for which there is no veil in all her kingdoms. So these verses describe the role of the archetypal goddess in the evolutionary process. In India, we have here, this was a picture taken in Sofia, but I was on the balcony of my friend's house, and they have this wonderful lingam and yoni within a circular pool. And the symbolism of the lingam and yoni is Indian. It represents the transcendent being pouring out the energy of life into the womb of creation. And when we contemplate the symbolism here, the archetypal god and goddess in embrace, we are pondering over the means by which life is generated, along with its deep and profound mystery. The active and passive powers of a single transcendent principle, which are essentially as one, appear as a duality. And the active power of deity and manifestation is depicted symbolically in world myth as the deity's goddess or consort. And the archetypal goddess factor can be found in all levels of existence beneath the first cause. So within the womb of the goddess, all of the planes of manifestation, a great gestation process is occurring, designed to ensure that each and every monad realizes its evolutionary objective. And on this basis, we undergo many tests and trials so that we may give birth to and express our latent spiritual faculties. So whilst we undergo very stringent tests within the realm of the archetypal goddess, she also assists and inspires us when we work in accordance with her intent, when we undertake the required spiritual disciplines, and especially when we perform acts of service for the benefit of humanity and nature's lower kingdoms, the animal, plant, and mineral. In Greek myth, Hera is the goddess who is always testing the heroes, particularly Heracles or Hercules, the name meaning Hera's glory. However, it is those tests which promote growth. And another aspect of the archetypal goddess is symbolized by Athena, the wisdom and warrior goddess and the great patroness of the heroes, often providing them with weapons and magical aids. This is symbolic of the archetypal goddess and how she functions for the spiritual aspirant. HPB describes the barrier between manifestation and transcendence as the veil of Isis. And in tarot symbolism, this is symbolized by the high priestess. Beyond her veil is the realm of transcendence. So the high priestess represents a pure essence of consciousness. She is the source of the vibratory patterns of the universe that underlie all manifestation, and her virgin milk, or the spiritual energies, provide life and sustenance to all levels of creation. The High Priestess Tarot card is situated on the Hermetic Kabbalah, or Tree of Life, between the Sephiroth, Kether, and Tifereth, that relate to aspects of the monad and the higher self, respectively. The Hebrew letter assigned to the path of the High Priestess is Gimel, meaning camel. I mention this because the camel is the ship of the desert. It will take one across the desert of the wasteland to the realm of transcendence. I'm speaking symbolically. It's serving the same symbolic function as the ferry boat of Indian teachings that, as I said, takes one from the shore of everyday life to the shore of transcendence or nirvanic bliss. The verse proceeds, then will she show thee the means and way, the first gate and the second, the third up to the very seventh, and then the goal, beyond which lie, bathed in the sunlight of the spirit, glories untold, unseen by any save the eye of the soul. So the seven gates are the seven portals described in fragment 3 of this classic work. And as stated in the text, these portals lead the aspirant across the waters onto the other shore. So here are the 7 portals, which are related to the 7 paramitas or perfections of Buddhism. There is but one road to the path. At its very end alone, the voice of the silence can be heard. The ladder by which the candidate ascends is formed of rungs of suffering and pain. These can be silenced only by the voice of virtue. Woe then to thee, disciple, if there is one single vice thou hast not left behind, for then the ladder will give way and overthrow thee. Its foot rests in the deep mire of thy sins and failings, and ere thou canst attempt to cross this wide abyss of matter, thou hast to lave thy feet in waters of renunciation. So this is very fierce stuff, but of course, this is the road to enlightenment. No one said it was easy. So the text then is offering very cautionary, extremely cautionary advice, describing the immense challenges relating to treading the path and the fundamental necessity of transmuting all vices into virtues. Beware lest thou shouldest set a foot still soiled upon the ladder's lowest rung. Woe unto thee who dares pollute one rung with miry feet. The foul and viscous mud will dry, become tenacious, then glue their feet unto the spot. And like a bird caught in the wily fowler's line, they will be stayed from further progress. Their vices will take shape and drag them down. Their sins will raise their voices like as the jackals laugh and sob after the sun goes down. Their thoughts become an army and bear him off a captive slave. I've mentioned the symbolism of the death of Actaeon in various talks I've given to the English Theosophical Society over the years. Actaeon is the callow youth who ventures into the forest and inadvertently catches a glimpse of the goddess Artemis bathing naked with her nymphs at a pool. Artemis, who's very protective of her purity, transforms Actaeon into a stag, and he is chased and devoured by his own hound. So here we have the saying "too much too soon" is appropriate. Venturing into the forest of the unconscious, inner worlds. Actaeon is a symbol for one who dabbles in esoteric pursuits but is not sufficiently prepared or educated in this respect. He catches a glimpse of the archetypal goddess, and the forces of the unconscious, symbolized by his hounds, overwhelm him. So here is an image of Mount Everest. As Theosophists, we describe the spiritual path as a mountainous ascent. And if we are going to ascend the symbolic cliff face, we are going to compact the lessons and learning experiences of many lives into a short few. And as the symbolism suggests, this is incredibly challenging. Here is an image of a mountain goat. The zodiacal sign of Capricorn and its ruling planet Saturn govern spiritual initiation. And when we tread the path, like the mountain goat of Capricorn, there will be instances when we must cling to a narrow symbolic precipice whilst all around us is falling apart. Capricorn and Saturn rule burdens, difficulties, isolation, and long delays. And these are to be expected when we undertake serious forms of spiritual development. Self-discipline, responsibility, patience, and endurance come under the domain of this astrological archetype. And these are hallmarks of the spiritual initiate in terms of the experiences they have undergone and the qualities that they demonstrate. Capricorn and Saturn rule synthesis and personality integration, which is a most necessary requirement if we are going to incorporate and express the energies and qualities of the higher self. And when we seek spiritual transformation, it's important to be aware that matters in life which are particularly testing to us can be equally as elevating to the soul in terms of the realization of its purpose. Adversity represents opportunity. When we experience adverse circumstances in our lives, we are offered the opportunity to express divine persistent will so that we may overcome these. Challenges test us within the crucible of human experience, the alchemical alembic, whilst offering the opportunity towards enhancing our spiritual growth. And the verse we have just considered emphasizes the imperative of spiritual purity when we tread the path. I mentioned spiritual cleansing, the removal of the vasanas. We must subjugate our lower instinctual desire-driven tendencies and purify our attitudes if we are to cope with the forces of the unconscious, which shall inevitably confront us. Here is a famous Shakespearean quote. Sweet are the uses of adversity, which like the toad, ugly and venomous, wears yet a precious jewel in his head. And this our life, exempt from public haunt, finds tongues in trees, books in the running brooks, sermons in stones, and good in everything. Here is an image of Roberto Assagioli. I mentioned him at the end of part one. Assagioli's wife was a theosophist, as was his mother. He was very strongly influenced by theosophical teachings. And when we tread the path, we must take inventory of ourselves as a personality, reflect upon our psychic constituents, and effectively separate the wheat from the chaff. This process of discrimination is what Hindu teachings refer to as viveka, the ability to discern or discriminate between that which is genuinely spiritual and that which is changing and transient. And Viveka forms the basis of the classic spiritual treatise, Viveka Chudamani, attributed to Adi Shankara, this word meaning the crest jewel of discrimination. So Roberto Assagioli described the spiritual path in his techniques of psychosynthesis. This is a term he used for soul infusion, where the triangles of the upper and lower triad are interlaced. And one of the techniques he offers is to recognize what is harmful or obstructive within our psyche and blocking our spiritual growth, and for us to actively cultivate the opposite quality. So if there is discord and division in our lives, we seek to cultivate harmony. If we are restless and impatient, we must develop a patient, self-disciplined approach. Selfish and separative thoughts and attitudes must be rendered inclusive. Sensitivity to personal issues in our lives must be superseded by sensitivity to the higher self, and fear must be supplanted by courage, the opposite quality. And this is a very valuable technique, because through it, various negative aspects of our character serve a valuable purpose. They make us aware of qualities we must develop, their opposite qualities, as part of the process of spiritual transformation. Kill thy desires, Lanu, make thy vices impotent, ere the first step is taken on the solemn journey. Strangle thy sins and make them dumb forever, before thou dost lift one foot to mount the ladder. Here are the 7 deadly sins listed or described by Christianity: lust, gluttony, greed, sloth, wrath, envy, and pride. And the counterpart to these are the 7 virtues: prudence, temperance, justice, courage, faith, hope, and charity. And this is an excellent moral code, the moral code of Christianity. This should be reflected in our lives as we tread the spiritual path. The concept of the Holy Grail arose out of Celtic myth and was later infused by mystical Christian teachings. The Grail, seen here in Rossetti's painting, The Damsel of the St. Graal. The Grail is a vessel which possesses magical properties. It offers healing, bliss, and spiritual transformation to those who display the necessary qualities required to attain it. The Grail is situated in an otherworldly realm and may only be attained by the questing knight who possesses the necessary purity, courage, heroism, honor, and virtue. And they must overcome many challenges in pursuit of the sacred vessel. So immediately we perceive similarities between the Grail and the soul. The soul is the instrument of the monad, and the adventures of the questing knights in pursuit of the Grail symbolize challenges and potential rewards associated with treading the path. Here is another lovely image, the Grail miracle. The Christian mystical work, La Quest del San Graal, is part of the Vulgate cycle, a series of 5 prose volumes describing the life of King Arthur and the quest for the Grail in magnificent detail. And it was this work that created Galahad, whom we see on the image here, the virgin knight destined to achieve the Grail. In one of his adventures, Galahad approaches the castle of the maidens. In the castle, the maidens, who symbolize the Christian virtues we've just considered, are imprisoned and guarded by the 7 knights of darkness, who represent the 7 deadly sins. And Galahad must defeat the knights and redeem the world by freeing the maidens. He manages to do so. Then a monk gives Galahad the key to the castle, enabling the virtues to prevail. Silence thy thoughts and fix thy whole attention on thy master, whom yet thou dost not see, but whom thou feelest. And when we tread the path, focus upon the higher self, and the implementation of its objectives is of paramount importance. We have the wonderful analogy of spiritual transformation in the flowering of a plant. The monad plants its seed into the soil of the material world. And at the stage before the plant flowers, even under the poorest and most challenging conditions, the plant will send all of its energy upwards into the bud so that it may flower and become a radiant center of beauty. And similarly, when we tread the path, we must ignore the cravings of our lower nature, the circumstances out there in the world, in favor of effecting spiritual transformation, sending the energies up to the bud of the higher self. If we are to succeed in unfolding the symbolic lotus petals of the soul, we must fix our whole attention upon fashioning ourselves into a suitable spiritual instrument, united with the potter's mind. Merge into one sense thy senses, if thou wouldst be secure against the foe. 'Tis by that sense alone which lies concealed within the hollow of thy brain, that the steep path which leadeth to thy master may be disclosed before thy soul's dim eyes. Long and weary is the way before thee, O disciple. One single thought about the past that thou hast left behind will drag thee down, and thou will have to start the climb anew. Kill in thyself all memory of past experiences. Look not behind, or thou art lost. Here again we have the mountain symbolism. And a mountaineer ascending a sheer cliff face is focused exclusively upon his position and the further movements that are going to take him to the summit. Anything else will place him in grave danger in terms of falling down the precipitous route previously negotiated. And when we tread the path, we do not cling to our past in any shape or form. This is anathema. One of the 5 moral restraints or yamas described in Patanjali's Yoga Sutras is called aparigraha. This may be defined as non-attachment, non-grasping, non-coveting, and non-hoarding. And primarily it describes the practice of letting go of both physical and non-physical things that prevent our further ascent of the symbolic cliff face. If we don't let go, they're going to drag us down. Do not believe that lust can ever be killed out if gratified or satiated, for this is an abomination inspired by Mara. It is by feeding vice that it expands and waxes strong, like to the worm that fattens on the blossom's heart. So the text is informing us of the insatiable nature of lust and its relationship to Mara, which in previous presentation I illustrated. HB describes this in the text as that which kills the soul. And Mara in Buddhist cosmology is personified as demonic forces which are antagonistic to enlightenment. Again, we have the image of Prince Siddartha, the immovable spot. the place between transcendence and manifestation. And this empowers him where he is oblivious to the demon Mara's efforts to deflect him from his spiritual purpose. He sends his 3 daughters to seduce him. This fails. He sends an army of terrifying and hideous demons, which is to no avail. He attacks the prince himself. They all fail. Siddhartha remains enlightenment, and at dawn he becomes a Buddha. So the legend of the Buddha informs us that we cannot eliminate or exhaust lust by simply suppressing it. Rather, through spiritual disciplines, especially meditation, we construct the antakarana so that we access the energies of the higher self, raising our consciousness before eventually uniting personality and soul. And when we unify soul and personality, we transcend the effects of Mara as we apprehend the voice of the silence. The rose must re-become the bud born of its parent stem before the parasite has eaten through its heart and drunk its life sap. The golden tree puts forth its jewel buds before its trunk is withered by the storm. So as I said, as monads, we are aspects of the solar logos, our parent stem, implanted into the soil of the material world as a means of fulfilling the intent of the great solar being by unfolding previously latent qualities. And when we intervene in our evolutionary progress, when we seek to accelerate our spiritual development and we consciously tread the path, the deeper psychology to which we have to respond to brings us fresh challenges. We are subjected to increased stress. If we were to examine the bud of a rose or a lotus or indeed any flower, an examination of this prior to flowering will indicate that great tension mounts before the petals are unfolded, and the unfoldment of the symbolic lotus petals of the soul or higher self are no different. Tension, crisis, and resolution are the cyclic mechanisms of growth, and this enables the jewel buds of the golden tree, the one life manifest, to flower. And here we have an image of the soul or higher self. The pupil must regain the child state he has lost ere the first sound can fall upon his ear. For me, this brings to mind the famous biblical quote from Matthew, "Except ye be converted and become as little children, ye shall not enter into the kingdom of heaven." And this informs us that we must retain a childlike spiritual innocence, a sense of wonderment at the magical process of creation and its eternal flux. The astrological archetype of Leo rules children and childlike qualities, and it also rules the heart chakra, as well as psychological wholeness. Its ruler, the sun, is round. And this is a necessary requirement if we are to undergo the higher initiations. As personalities, we abdicate the throne of consciousness, royalty rules Leo, in order that the true sovereign, the higher self, can occupy the throne. And these matters all relate to the Leo archetype, as does, as said, the heart chakra, which is key to the transmutation of desire, the expression of its qualities. The light from the one master, the one unfading golden light of spirit, shoots its effulgent beams on the disciple from the very first. Its rays thread through the thick, dark clouds of matter. Now here, now there, these rays illuminate, like sun sparks light the earth through the thick foliage of the jungle growth. But, O disciple, unless the flesh is passive, head cool, the soul as firm and pure as flaming diamond, the radiance will not reach the chamber, its sunlight will not warm the heart, nor will the mystic sounds of the Akashic heights reach the ear, however eager at the initial stage. So the previous verse informs us of the ever-present nature of the higher self, which seeks to mold us into an effective spiritual instrument so that it can infuse us with its energies. So fulgent beams are radiated towards us when we commit to the path. However, if its rays are to penetrate the thick dark clouds of matter mentioned, we must adopt spiritual disciplines, engage in this process of spiritual purification that I keep referring to, so that the radiance of the soul reaches the chamber of the heart. And this is why we must express heart chakra qualities: unconditional love, compassion, empathy, inclusiveness. The mystic sounds of the Akashic Heights are described in HPB's footnotes as the mystic sounds or the melody heard by the ascetic at the beginning of his cycle of meditation called Anatta Sabda by the yogis. Anatta is the heart chakra. Indian teachings describe Anatta Sabda as the awareness of pure sound that underlies all audible sounds in the same way that the transcendent principle underlies creation. Anatta Sabda, the text informs us, is apprehended when Kundalini is ascended to the heart chakra, image of the heart chakra here. Unless thou hearest, thou canst not see. Unless thou seest, thou canst not hear. To hear and see, this is the second stage. So these are interrelated verses. We must be able to hear the inner voice of the soul as a means of seeing the outer world as it essentially is, i.e., an agglomeration of forms infused by the one life. Similarly, if we view the outer world as this assemblage of appearances infused by the indwelling one life, we become more attuned to the inner voice. When the disciple sees and hears, and when they smell and taste, eyes closed, ears shut, with mouth and nostrils stopped, when the four senses blend and are ready to pass into the fifth, that of the inner touch, then into stage the fourth, they have passed on. And in the fifth, O slayer of thy thoughts, all these again have to be killed beyond reanimation. Withhold thy mind from all external objects, all external sights. Withhold internal images, lest on thy soul light a dark shadow they cast. Thou art now in dharana, the sixth stage, as being the sixth stage of Patanjali's Yoga Sutras. The stage of dharana occurs when the mind is focused upon a symbol placed in what we call the sacred square inch, the Ajna chakra, located between the eyebrows. And this is where the aspirant creates a form comprised of the mental substance of the lower mind. This form is maintained in purity and clarity so that the higher abstract mind may contemplate the symbol or concept. The lower mind, clear of its everyday clutter, then functions as a mirror for the higher mind. When thou hast passed into the seventh, O happy one, thou shalt perceive no more the sacred three, for thou shalt have become that three thyself. Thyself and mind, like twins upon a line, the star which is thy goal burns overhead. The three that dwell in glory and in bliss ineffable, now in the world of Maya have lost their names. They have become one star, the fire that burns but scorches not that fire which is the upadhi of the flame. And this, O yogi of success, is what is called dhyana, the right precursor of samadhi. So these verses are describing the passage from the focus of dharana to dhyana, from concentration to meditation. And this enables the aspirant to enter Buddhic consciousness, where the mind is united with this level of being. Theosophy often uses the term manas tejasi, or radiant mind. The star that burns in the text represents the atmic plane. HPB states also that the star is that of the Arhat, the fourth degree initiate, And the upadhi of the flame, which is mentioned here, is the basis of the ever unreachable flame of the monad, as long as the ascetic remains in this life. And now thyself is lost in self, thyself unto thyself, merged in that self from which thou first did radiate. Where is thy individuality, Lanu? Where the Lanu himself? It is a spark lost in the fire, the drop within the ocean, the ever-present ray become the all in the eternal radiance. And now, Lanu, thou art the doer and the witness, the radiator and the radiation, light in the sound and the sound in the light. So this poetic verse or verses elaborate upon the consciousness of the Arhat, where the personality is completely merged with the higher self, the observer in the observed, subject and object are as one. And this state of consciousness relating to the Atma plane affords a realization that the manifold beings in the material world essentially all dwell within the one self. Thou art acquainted with the five impediments, O blessed one. Thou art their conqueror, the master of the six, deliverer of the four modes of truth. The light that falls upon them shines from thyself. O thou who wast disciple but art teacher now. And of these modes of truth, hast thou not passed through knowledge of all misery, truth the first? Hast thou not conquered the Mara's king at Zee, the portal of assembling, truth the second? Hast thou not sin at the third gate destroyed, and truth the third attained? Hast thou not entered thou the path that leads to knowledge, the fourth truth? So in the Yoga Sutras of Patanjali, he refers to five kleshas or causes of suffering: ignorance, sense of ego, attachment, aversion, fear of death. And the modes of truth referred to in the last verse are the Four Noble Truths of Buddhism: the truth of suffering, the truth of the origin of suffering, the truth of the cessation of suffering, the truth of the path to the cessation of suffering. And now rest neath the Bodhi tree, which is perfection of all knowledge. For know thou art the master of SAMÂDHI, the state of faultless vision. Here's an image, another one of the Buddha, the Bodhi tree. The immovable spot, as I said, the interface between transcendence and manifestation, what the alchemists symbolize by the intractable problem of the squaring of the circle. Behold, thou hast become the light, thou hast become the sound, thou art thy master and thy God, thou art thyself, the object of thy search, the voice unbroken that resounds throughout eternities, exempt from change, from sin exempt, the seven sounds in one, the voice of the silence, Om Tat Sat. These words appear in Krishna's classic discourse to Arjuna in the Bhagavad Gita. This is a description of the supreme absolute truth, Om Tat Sat. And here's an image of Krishna giving his discourse to Arjuna. So thank you very much, everyone. That concludes my talk.